Die Frankfurter Buchmesse 2008, die Faszination Comic. Wir berichten live in Bild, Text, Ton und Video von dieser Leitmesse, die in diesem Jahr ihr 60. Jubiläum feiert.
Kein Problem. Just say it for a second. It won't tell anything really serious. That's how it's Ja, schönen guten Tag zu dem Gespräch mit Jason Lutes, dem Comicautor des Bandes Berlin, dessen zweiter Band jetzt gerade frisch zur Messe fertig geworden ist. Der erste ist vor mittlerweile 4 Jahren erschienen. Sie sehen bereits am Umfang jeweils über 200 Seiten, naja gut, 180 Seiten, über 200 Seiten jeweils, dass das ein sehr groß angelegtes Comic-Projekt ist. Eines, was auch in den Jahren, die wir zuletzt erlebt haben, wo der Begriff der Graphic Novel, des gezeichneten Romans, Konjunktur entwickelt hat, dann noch von ungewöhnlichem Ausmaß ist. Das Ganze ist hiermit noch nicht einmal abgeschlossen. Dies hier ist der Mittelband einer geplanten Trilogie. Der dritte Band wird, danach werde ich gleich natürlich fragen, mutmaßlich in einigen Jahren fertig sein. Und dann werden wir ein mehr als 600-seitiges Œuvre haben, was über das Berlin der Weimarer Republik erzählt. Und das Verblüffende an dieser ganzen Sache ist, dass sich kein Deutscher dafür gefunden hat, diese Geschichte zu zeichnen, sondern ein Amerikaner, eben Jason Lutes, geboren 1967 in New Jersey, lebt mittlerweile in Seattle. Und darüber möchte ich mich mit ihm unterhalten und ich werde einige Bilder und einzelne Seiten dort oben hin projizieren, sodass wir ein bisschen klarer anhand der Grafik machen können, wie dieser Comic arbeitet, wie er gezeichnet ist, was für Tricks darin angewendet werden. Und das Ganze wird, wie Sie sich vorstellen können, auf Englisch laufen. Ich hoffe, dass wir halbwegs verständlich für Sie sein werden. An Jason Lutes wird es nicht scheitern, an mir vielleicht schon eher. Haben Sie Nachsicht. Ich wette, die Antworten werden alles ungefähr wieder richtig stellen, was ich gegebenenfalls naiv fragen werde. So, Jason, let's just start our conversation. There were 4 years between the 2 volumes of Berlin in Germany and even a quite longer time in the States. What took you so long to do the second part?
After I did the first several chapters of the first volume, I wasn't making enough money to survive, so I had to take on other jobs. And
what were these jobs?
What were these jobs? I freelance illustration. I washed dishes for a long time.
You did?
Yeah. I was a dishwasher, professional dishwasher. In fact, that was my favorite career to date.
Quite for sure.
Dishwasher. Any job I could find, really, to pay the bills. And the more, when I originally put out this book, I wouldn't get paid until by my North American publisher until 3 months after publication, because they are a very small publisher and didn't have a lot of resources. So it was sort of a downward spiral. The more I didn't work on the comic, the more I had to do other work, and ended up only being able to put out a chapter a year for a period of time. So in North America, it was actually, I started the project 12 years ago, so I've been working on it a very long time.
How long will it take you to finish the whole job? Do you plan for another 6 weeks, 6 years for the third volume? 6 weeks would be great, yeah.
I'm right now at my current rate of production, it'll take me 4 more years.
That's quite fast.
Well, for me, that's fast.
Yeah, you're raising the pace. That's fantastic. You published it in America in form of single comic books, 24 pages each. Why this short format and why the collected ones in Germany?
Well, the original intention, when I set out to start the project, I knew that it was going to be a 600-page book. I wanted a single. In fact, my original goal was to have a comic book with a very thick spine, regardless of the content. And the easiest way at the time to get published in America was to do, this is a standard comic book in America, a flimsy pamphlet like this.
And it looks beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're very happy with the design. Less and less people do this these days because the market for these specific books is really disappearing. But we're going to follow it through for the entire project. But the original point was that by putting out one of these, I could make a little bit of money sooner than spending 4 years working on a single volume and then getting paid after that. So this was a way to try to make a little money as I went along. And I also like the idea of having a different a different package to design and play with. And there were aspects of, like, this is supposed to be suggestive of a swastika.
It is, in fact.
No swastika is ever shown inside the book itself, which was very important to me to actually not have that symbol, just because it's so powerful. And so we have so many associations today with it that are so powerful that to put it in the book felt like too much of a shorthand. It would sort of, people would immediately think things when they saw that, and I wanted people more to pay attention to the people as opposed to the symbols. So I just tried to suggest it using the cover, but you might not necessarily see that, but it might put the idea in your head. So that was a design aspect that we played with. And then the colors, over the course of the whole series, the colors these are not in order, but the colors go through a gradual color shift towards a more saturated colors. So I'm always playing around with those formal elements as well, trying to figure out what works. And then the original goal was always to have a trilogy, so my North American publisher also is putting it out in collected volumes. But it's great that actually to see this just in the, when German readers get it, they get it in one big chunk, which is the way I would like readers to receive it. This is a difficult thing for people to keep up with.
Why did you choose the period of the Weimar Republic? The normal thing we as Germans would expect that everyone outside Germany is interested in the Nazi era, but not in the years before that. What was your motive to choose these not so well-known years?
I think it was exactly that. It was that all of the information I got as an American with a very poor public high school education in America was about the war and the Holocaust, and it was never really addressed in depth. It was always a series of dates and numbers and a very cursory treatment of the subject. And as an adult, I became very interested in the reasons the events leading up to those events, and like what allowed all of those things to happen, as opposed to the events themselves, which there's been so much written about the war, like in such incredible in-depth and detail. But in English, there's not a whole lot of work addressing the years leading up to that and the situation. So I just became very personally interested in that.
Let's take a look at it, some of the panels and some of the pages of your book, because I'd love to talk about the context, the graphic work you did. Let's just for the beginning make the entrance into the second volume of Berlin. For the first volume that started with one of the main characters, Martha Keller, is arriving by train in the city of Berlin. And now we have new important characters of your line of comics. We have an American jazz band that arrives in Berlin. They are coming again by train. Why this?
By bus,
yeah, very sorry. Why these arrivals as the starters? And why choosing an American band as a new central motive in the second volume?
Well, each volume has a number of themes that I work within, that I try to distinguish it with. It's the first book is in English is called City of Stones, and then the second book is City of Smoke, and the last one will be called City of Light. And for me, that's a progression from material to immaterial. And the volumes will also be defined by pairs of relationships. The first volume, Kurt, a journalist, and Marta, an art student, have a relationship, and that their relationship sort of defines the first volume. And then the second volume is about an American jazz musician and the German woman he falls in love with. And then the third volume, the main relationship thread will be between Sylvia Brown and David Schwartz, two other characters. And the coming into and leaving of the city is just both me as somebody who tries to imagine the city and entering into it. That visual motif was something that really appealed to me, and for readers in America, I thought it was a really good way to actually literally bring them into the city through the eyes of an outsider. And I really wanted an American jazz band in there to get a little bit of an outsider's perspective on what it might have felt like for them to enter into that world at the time. Jazz was, of course, very, very popular then, and I wanted to explore more of that aspect of the culture.
The culture is a very important thing, in fact, in this book. Here we have some panels about the magazine Weltbühne, which many of you may know, but I guess not many Americans will know it. And will not know people like Karl von Ossietzky or Kurt Tucholsky and people like that. And one of your characters, Kurt Severing, one of the main characters, he's a member of the editorial staff of the Weltbühne, and here we see one of the conferences debating politics and in the Weimar Republic. How did you do research for these scenes?
I read, I don't, to my embarrassment, I do not read or speak German, so all the research I did was in English, and I came across a book called The German Intellectuals in the Weimar Republic, and that's where I discovered Ossietzky. I had never heard of him before, and the more I read about him, the more fascinated I became, and the more I admire him. I think he's a really an admirable figure at the time, and I really wanted to. For me, it was an exploratory, investigative experience of trying to understand the politics of the time through his writing and through his editorial perspective. So I just read as much as I could about him and all the other writers, and tried to get a good mental image of what their world would have been like. And then, that conversation is largely invented, but based on a lot of ideas that they espoused at the time.
When we look at some pages earlier, we have the same people debating together and so, and we have these wonderful graphic elements, for example, like these just scribbled pencil and then the piece of paper. How do you use these effects of imaginary things that people work with? There are some scenes in your books which use this kind of technique.
I'm always trying to find, pretty much in every chapter I try to find some new way to use comics that may not have been used before, to try to express something, to communicate something in a new way that hopefully doesn't draw too much attention to itself. Ideally,
no, I think it doesn't, because it's quite rare, in fact. But of course, when you use it has a point each time for itself, and that's what fascinates me. You remember the first times you used it, but you have forgotten it up to then, and that's really great.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's a tough balancing act, because if I get too clever, then people pay attention to me being clever, and that's not the point. So a lot of times I'll do that. Like right now, looking at it, I think maybe that's too much.
I don't think so.
It's done.
So, take a look at a picture like this. This, of course, is a little bit like the photography by August Sander, the different professional classes and things like that. Did you use Sander as a source book for some of your panels?
Oh, yes, absolutely. In fact, Gudrun Brown, one of the characters in the first volume, is directly based on a photograph by him. But yeah, I have I think all of his published work, and I refer to it constantly for all kinds of, not just the way people looked and their clothing and details, but background, little details in the background which are hard to find in other sources. So yeah, Sander is a huge source for me.
What's fascinating for me is that you have the different classes present in your comic book. You have the lower classes, the higher classes, the middle class, and everything. This, of course, is now the worker classes. So, and you change it from each comic book to comic book, that the main characters change. You have different aspects of social life in Berlin. How did you compose that? Was that clear from the beginning on, that you will show every aspect of the life in Berlin, and did you plan it exactly that will happen? Or is it a little bit more spontaneous in the events of things you have to tell?
That aspect actually was planned from the very beginning. I set out to, I remember I made a list of the things I wanted to address in the story, and one of the goals was to show as broad a portrait of human life at the time as I could, and that I remember I had a list of different kinds of occupations and different people from different social classes, and also like the five senses. How can I show smell and taste and touch and music? How can I try to convey that in comics? Like that as a challenge was very important to me, and to really I saw it partly as an attempt to really use comics to express as much about human existence as I was capable. So from the very beginning, that was one of the plans. But in terms of the specific characters and their relationships, that's largely improvisational. That's very spontaneous as it evolves.
You're also using different techniques of drawing styles. For example, the Owens over there, this is expressionistic, like Franz Masereel and people from this era. Why did you change your drawing style from panel to panel, from page to page sometimes?
It's partly to try to convey a specific emotional effect, and also to try to insert some of the actual visual techniques that were used at the time.
Like paintings, for example, over there.
And it's a poor Mazaril attempt. Those are actually copies of gross drawings, but that's like a pseudo Mazaril drawing, which is a little too much. It doesn't really work.
Well, I think it works quite well because
I'm my own worst critic.
Yeah, well, but it evokes the specific artistic situation of Berlin of this time, and that's perfect,
an image,
I guess.
Yes, as an image, I think it works. The actual drawing of the image I'm unhappy with, but the thing I think I'm actually good at is the actual, like the choosing of what image and what words to put together. And I have, my real struggle is with making the art, the way I really want it to look. But I feel like the thing that comes naturally to me and where my actual skill lies is in the engineering of it, the architecture as opposed to the actual rendering of it.
Another example for this art of engineering is, of course, this panel, which has all the vitality of the golden 20s in Berlin. You have all the things you could imagine from the movies and from the Art Deco episodes and so. But this, of course, for you is a very unusual panel because of these really big sound words and everything like it. This is kind of a signature panel for the episode that's playing here. How did you compose something like that? Is that the result of a very long planning of one single panel, or does it come naturally to you when you work on something like this?
Sometimes when it's at its best, it really feels like music. It feels like there's a rhythm and I'm intuitively following that rhythm, and then it gets to a point like this and it just makes sense. Like it feels like a collage like this visually conveys what I'm trying to convey about the overlapping of, the collapsing of time, and this experience that has for the people involved is a very, like the days blur together, and it just is a very memorable, happy time for them. So it just made sense to me. In my previous book, Navin, which Carlson also publishes, there was a period where there are several pages where there's no words at all. And I didn't even think about it when I did it, but later people always mention it to me, and then later when I go back and read it, I realized it was almost like a bridge in a song, like a musical, like a transition in terms of the rhythm. So those kinds of decisions, they often just come naturally out of what came before. It's a natural progression from what came before in the story.
And you must have loved the observation of these pages without words, because you're using that in Berlin quite often too.
Yes.
One of the panels I love best is this one, which I really find brilliant, with these kind of bird's flight combining with the musical notes that are coming out of that. I've never seen something like this. How did you come to that idea? That's fantastic.
One of the things I really enjoy about making comics is when I draw and I create an environment, I enter into that environment, and because the words and the pictures are simultaneous for me when I'm writing a script, I can introduce a visual element and then allow that visual element to take the story somewhere else. So in this case, there was already a flock of birds sitting on the roof, and the radio is playing and the musician is playing along with the radio, and I just had this like impulsive notion to have the music carry up and have the birds carry it away. It was just a kind of lyrical image that came to me, and I decided to do it that way. But it came out of having those elements down there already on the page, and basically moving them around until something happened.
And it's like the notes are transforming into birds. That is what I love best.
That's part of the idea,
This one reminded me a little bit, but well, let's see if we got the lower half. No, unfortunately not. But this sequence, the last panel, I've got it here as a paper copy. The last panel, for me, looks a little bit like Hergé. Did you have strong European influences on your work, even from the comic history?
Oh yes. And Hergé was primary among them. Yeah, Hergé and Sam Pezzo, Private Eye, who does that Italian artist, I can't remember, is Giardino, Vittorio Giardino, and Boujon, French artist. When I was younger, their styles really appealed to me. I grew up reading superhero comics in America, but my early exposure to European comics really broadened my perspective, and my style is completely. I feel like this is my own style now, but it's very obviously influenced more by European artists than.
How about the newer European artists? Which one do you like?
Newer?
These guys? Yeah, the actual ones.
You're gonna put me on the spot. I love Trondheim, who you're going to interview later today. I love all the other Carlson artists, many of whose work I had not seen until today, but Reinhardt.
Oh yeah,
yes, talk about Johnny Cash at the Carlson booth, which is very beautiful.
You're a fan of Johnny Cash?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, you must love the comic then.
Oh yeah. Unfortunately, I can't read German, so hopefully there's going to be an English translation of that soon. But and I'm actually just walking around, it's overwhelming, because in the States we don't get a lot of these books. So it's inspiring and amazing to walk around this room and see like incredible work on display. It boggles my imagination, given the work that I see in the States.
Here we have a quite action-packed page. We have kind of, well, triumph of a theft and people pursuing each other and things like that, and very much happening there. Then we have these very poetic scenes, very poetic pages like this one, which ends on this very quiet note with just the eyes looking at the very small panels and so on. So you have a very, very strong rhythm in your book. How do you compose the single books? Is there always a kind of musical rhythm into the single volumes of this? Do you have a kind of melody playing in your head when you're composing the different narrations?
Yeah, that would be a way to describe it. I mean, I'm not actually a musical person, so actually when I do scenes that are about music, I always feel like I'm getting it wrong, because I don't have, I mean, I certainly appreciate music, but I'm not a musician and I don't really understand it formally. Comics is really my medium, and the analogy is appropriate because it is, I have a structure. It's like jazz. I have a structure, 24 pages a chapter, 24 chapters long, and within that structure I set down certain ideas or themes, and then I improvise within those themes. So I guess the music analogy is actually very apt. So a lot of it is feeling it out, much like the crow and the musical note panel. A lot of it is just putting the elements down and arranging them and figuring out like a flow that both conveys what I'm trying to convey and maximizes the qualities of comics. When I feel like qualities that are integral and unique to comics.
Yeah. But if you don't regard yourself as a kind of musician, how can you explain something like that? That is really fantastic just to see someone playing the clarinet and doing the concert work and everything like it. Is one of, well, for me, one of the best portraits of a musician I've ever seen.
Oh,
so you must be quite close to this art form too.
I would like to. This was actually a great experience. I found a piece of music that I wanted him to play. And this is a 2-page sequence. This is the first page. And I took this piece of music and I went to a coffee shop, and all day long I just listened to it over and over again and made drawings, like little diagrams, and I mean, not knowing how to write or read music, I would make what I would imagine the notes to sound like, and the way that the rhythm broke down, and then I would take those little diagrams, abstract drawings, and then turn them into a page that attempts to capture what the music sounds like. So this is another example of like a challenge I set for myself that hopefully fits into the feeling of the rest of the work and doesn't seem too grandstanding, too drawing attention to itself too much. But that was a really satisfying couple of pages to work on.
I think you could sense that as a reader. And what I found very fascinating was that you focus absolutely on the musician. You don't have any details on these 2 pages. They are just the figures, just the characters playing. In comparison with a page like this one, which is so rich in details. And even you can compose, of course, of the 6 panels, 1 big panel, that of course is something that Spiegelman did quite fascinating in Maus. And so you're always changing between pages very rich in detail, and then these things which we've seen before without any details at all. That of course is a quite important decision for the different scenes. But why, for example, doing here, this is a scene which tells about the suicide of a factory owner, which shoots himself some pages afterwards. So why these very pretty and little details? Do they tell something about him, or what was your goal in doing this? What was your objection?
I think my feeling with this, well, this is actually his point of view. He's sitting at the desk, and those are his thoughts. And so I was trying to, the scene starts basically inside his head, and it's the last moments of his life, and he knows that. So I feel like all of the detail should be really clear and resonant, and he's aware that he's about to kill himself. So his surroundings are very I mean, maybe oppressive. Maybe the reality is oppressive to him because he wants to leave it behind. So yeah, I think that, but it was an intuitive decision. But the more I did it, the more I realized that's what it was about. I was trying to convey his state of mind through the detail of the drawing, essentially. And the other
kind of picture of his life, with all things, with the family,
yes.
with the workplace, and things like that.
The note he's leaving behind, right? He smokes cigars,
where he conducts his business and things like that. Yeah. No, that was really fantastic. But the page that stunned me the most, that's the next one. This, of course, shows just the first line, but the rest of the page is completely blank. You just have these two panels, and then you have the sound word, but just two letters of it. Of course, it's not bang or pang like here. It's just the sound going out of the page, hauling over there, and the rest of the page is completely blank. That was fascinating when I turned the page. How did you come across that idea?
Well, I had already played around with the idea. In the previous volume, a character dies, and when she dies, the panel borders disappear.
Exactly, yeah. But you still filled the page.
But, excuse me?
You still filled the page.
Yeah, still filled the page, right.
And now that the page is empty.
Right. So I had this concept before about the panel borders basically delineating reality, like, or the living world. So with anything within the panel border would be happening in the story, and then as soon as those borders start to disappear, you're leaving, it's the loss of life, or you're departing to another world, or however you want to think about it. So when it came to this point, I wanted this person's death to be sudden and unexpected, and very open in terms of the way you interpreted it. Like I could have chosen to really follow, because he didn't die right then. He actually died several days later, and I could have actually followed his experience more in detail. But this just occurred to me as a way to dramatize that event, and it's one of those things where I feel like maybe it's too clever, because you turn that page and then you go, wow, what's going on? And then you think about the device. Because it's very much, it's in your face. It really is, like, it's a whole blank page, and you have no choice but to really consider what I did, what my choice as an author. And in a sense that, for me, it's a hard line, because in a sense that's a failure, because you're out of the story, and you're paying more attention to me than...
I see your point, but I think the first impression you get by turning a page like this is it's completely surprise. And afterwards you're thinking about it, but I think this is the important effect, that you have these elements of surprise, because you don't know when it's knocking at the door what's going to happen. You think they will beat him up or something like that. You don't expect them to shoot him. So that I think is perfect for the narration you're telling.
Thank you, Andreas. And actually the page turn, that brings up a great thing. The page turn, for me, the actual turning of the page, is a real vital aspect of comics, and something that you won't be able to replace with an ebook. There will be no page turning. And in a comic book, much different than a prose novel, it's like a film cut. It's like what happens when you turn that page, you reveal something. It's a visual thing, and you can take advantage of it in a case like this. You can have, Hergé actually did this throughout his work. On the lower right-hand corner of a page, there would be a cliffhanger, or a little, there's somebody would scream from off panel, and you just want to turn that page to see what happens next. So it's this really wonderful mechanical aspect of comics that I try to take advantage of whenever possible. Like sometimes I'll have a character open a door, and they'll reach for the door at the bottom of a right-hand panel, so that you as the reader, you turn the page, it's like opening that door. So I really try to pay attention to those, even those very mundane aspects of the construction of a book, and try to make as much use of those as possible.
Right. Well, the last thing I've got, that is the final of the second volume. So we have here the Weimar Parliament sitting there with the Nazis on the far right side. We have a scenery of Berlin, and that we have the Siegessäule in Berlin, and that's the climax in a way of a book. The jazz band is leaving again, they are leaving Berlin, the clarinet player is leaving Berlin with his love, and we are leaving all the characters we got to know during 200 or even 400 pages. So what will come next? You already told us who will be the main characters in the third volume, but how long are you going to play? Are you reaching the Nazi time, or are you stopping just before? And what will happen? Just a few hints for us.
It'll be mostly sad.
Okay, no one expects different things, in fact.
It's not going to be, butterflies and candy bars. But I also don't want it to be, it's about human existence, and human existence is about, like so much, and there's going to be, I want there to be happiness and joy and all of the aspects that people experience in their lives, but of course the reality of their world at the time, just inevitably it's going to be about this downward spiral. But I will say that I think I've come up with an ending that is actually hopeful, believe it or not, and that the span of the narrative will go up until 1933 when Hitler assumes the chancellorship. That will actually be the point when the narrative ends, but there will also be some glimpses into the future. And I guess that's all I'll say about that.
That's absolutely okay. We'll just have to wait for 4 years. So thanks you very much, Jason. That was a fantastic insight into your book. Wenn Sie bei der Signierstunde von Jason Lutes jetzt teilnehmen wollen, sie findet an Tisch 6 statt und ich habe hier ein paar Nummern, mit denen man sich dann in der Reihenfolge, die da draufsteht, bitte anstellen möge. Die verteile ich jetzt. Vielen Dank für die Aufmerksamkeit.